Thank you for joining us. Make sure you hit like, subscribe, and that notification button so you can catch all episodes that are coming out here. I'm Michael Adams, Graver Legacy Battle. My panelists tonight from the Gridiron Battle Zone, Brian King, Leroy Thompson. We have an interview for you tonight with a third round draft pick out of Nebraska, where he was an All-American. He was an 11-year NFL guard with the Bears and the Seahawks. And then he finished out with 1 year in the original USFL. So going back here a little ways. He's with the Chicago Blitz, briefly with Boston. So we have Bob Newton here. Bob, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. And it's great to be with you. I always like to talk football. So
Awesome. So interview only tonight. Brian, start us out.
All right, Bob. So you grew up in the Los Angeles area and played football at John Glenn High School in Norwalk. What were those early days like for you?
difficult. I was terrible. My first year, I went out for football, which was my sophomore year. My freshman year, I was almost flunking out of high school, and the athletic director there said, Bob, why don't you go out for football? Because I was a pretty big kid at that time. Because why don't you go out for football? And I think it'd really be good for you. And I go, well, I've never played. I used to watch Pop Warner football every Saturday, but I was always too big, to meet the weight scale for my age. So I did that, and that first year was just a real orientation, man. I mean, I was too big for the B teams and everything, so I just got the crap knocked out of me almost every day. But I didn't quit. I came back, and then I got a little bit better each year. But I think I had one scholarship coming out of high school, and that was to Santa Barbara University. They didn't even have football now. So I went to a junior college after that, but I had great coaching. I had coaches that took their time with me and brought me along. I had some great teammates in high school that helped me, and I really liked football, the family part of it.
My question, Mr. Newton, is like Michael mentioned at the beginning, you played for Nebraska, and of course, one of the first things people think about with Nebraska is national titles. My question to you is, what about that team in 1970 was so special, that Nebraska Cornhusker team? And I mean, how were you able to help bring home hardware for the first ever national title for such a big school?
Yeah, that was, they'd had when Coach Devaney got there in 1962, they brought him down from Wyoming. He had had a very competitive team, year after year. I think they played in 2 or 3 games that they could have won the national championship against Alabama, but I think they got beat, and I think one other school. So then they had a couple tough years, which was tough years for them. They were 6-4 in 1967 and 1968, and Coach Devaney and his staff, which included Coach Osborne. Coach Devaney was the head coach, of course, and then Coach Osborne was the offensive coordinator. And they just started they felt they needed to make some changes. And one of those changes, they felt they needed to start expanding their recruiting areas. And they started recruiting in Southern California, the state of California. They thought they needed some offensive linemen. So they offered me a scholarship. I wanted to go to USC really, really bad. But every Southern California kid does. And they had called me and they said, we're really interested in you, because my idol at that time was Ron Yeri, who's an NFL Hall of Famer. And we played at the same junior college, at Cerritos College. He was 3 years ahead of me, though, but I followed him and I went to SC games and watched him play. So that was that and San Diego State. Don Coryell was the head coach at San Diego State, and they offered me a scholarship. But I tell you, Coach Osborne he's one of the hardest working men I've ever seen in my life. I mean, on the field, he, after practices and 2 days, he'd run around the start jogging around the field for about an hour just to wrap everything up.
Wow.
I couldn't believe the energy he had. Very, very intelligent man. And, we had some super players. Of course, Johnny Rodgers was a sophomore that year, and he was just lightning speed, and just he was a threat anywhere on the field. And we had a great defense. Our black shirt defense was very, very good, and we had a good offensive line, and we had a couple quarterbacks that were we had Jerry Taggy, who was the main quarterback, but we had Van Bronson and Jerry Taggy. So the year before that, 69, before the national championship, we were 9-2 that year, and at the end of that, we played in the Sun Bowl and we beat Georgia like 45-6. And a lot of writers at that time, I think we were ranked 6 or 7 in the nation. But a lot of the writers thought, after the season and the way we dominated Georgia, that they thought we might have been one of the best teams in the nation at that time with that 9-2 record. So we went into 1970 with a lot of confidence, and we had, like I said, we had Johnny Rodgers was a junior in 70, and we had Richie Glover, who ended up being an Outland Trophy winner, Larry Jacobson, Willie Harper on defense, Jeff Kinney on offense. And so we just had a lot of offensive power and a great defense. And it just came together, and it came together on New Year's Day, January 1st. When we played in the Orange Bowl that day, when the game started, we were ranked number 3 in the nation at that time. On January 1st, 1971, the day of the Orange Bowl, we were ranked number 3 in the nation, and Texas was number 1, and Ohio State was number 2. Texas got knocked off by Notre Dame in the Cotton Bowl, and then with Joel Theismann had a great game for Notre Dame, and then Jim Plunkett, the quarterback for Stanford, had a great day against Ohio State in the Rose Bowl, and they beat the Buckeyes there. And so when we're traveling they're taking us. We're on the team bus going to the stadium, and they made an announcement that that both of those teams, those undefeated teams, have been defeated, and we're the only undefeated team left. So the bus went crazy, man. Yelling and screaming and everything. And then Danny gets up. He goes, "All right, listen, I want your attention. We still have a game to play here." So he calmed things down. So we started concentrating again. But man, we were fired up. But those LSU Tigers, they weren't a real big team, but they were tough football. They played tough football there in that Southeast, man. And the score ended up being 17-12, but it was a great ending to my career there at Nebraska, and I have great endearment for that state and the football program there.
That's nice.
That's awesome.
Well, Bob, 1971, you're drafted by the Chicago Bears. Gale Sayers is still with the team at that point. Brian Piccolo, sadly, had just passed away a year earlier. We all know the story of that beautiful friendship. Were the Bears players still talking about that when you were there? And also, what was it like playing with Gale?
Well, Gil was at the end of his career, and I think 71, he retired mid-season or somewhere. I don't think he even finished the season out. One of the last runs I saw Gil, I think, was in an exhibition game against St. Louis in 71 exhibition season, and he was hobbling, trying to go around the corner, and it was obvious he couldn't run like he used to, and it's because of the knee injuries that he had. So he retired at that time in the 71 season, and I heard all kinds of stories, but one of the movie Brian's Song, that was a lot of the filming was at our training camp that year in 71 in Rensselaer, Indiana. The Bears trained there for about 200 years. Not that long, but they were there a long time. And I was a rookie, man. I mean, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I was just taking orders, So, but we saw these people walking around our training camp. That was James Caan. Nobody knew who he was at that time, as far as an actor. And Billy D. Williams, who played Gale, nobody knew who he was either. Really, they had not, had been, reached their epic notoriety yet. And after that movie, both of them became superstars.
Right.
And they said they felt the people, Ed O'Bradovich participated in it a little bit. Dick Butkus, I think. Abe Gibran, our defensive coordinator coach at that time, he was in a few shots. But that was really interesting seeing that movie after because a lot of those shots were in Rensselaer, Indiana. And
all right.
When you're a rookie, man, in those days, I had to get veterans their dinner. I'm exhausted sitting at the table and I hear, "Hey, Newton, yeah, go get me another round of food." Okay. So, I mean, we were subservient to the vets, man. And then they when they wanted entertainment, "Hey, Newton, go up there and sing the Nebraska fight song." So hell, I didn't even know it. I just said, "Go Big Red, go Big Red." But anyway, I don't think that stuff now. These rookies are making too much money now to be picking up dinners and stuff and doing entertainment. But it was just you did that stuff to fit in,
Right.
and,
Right.
And show some humility too. So,
Well, they loved you too because you had a nickname, so that's always a good sign too. So, Newt.
Fig, that started at Nebraska. That nickname, and it stuck. I didn't like it at first, man. I mean, the first guy that started calling me, I go, "Hey, no, it's Bob. That's my name." "Well, what's your last name?" And I said, "Newton." He goes, "Well, like Fig Newton, right?" So the press got a hold of it, and boy, they went with it. Yeah, that guy's name. He was a kid from, I'd never been out of California, and I started. We had guys from all over Jersey, Pennsylvania on the roster. And those Eastern guys had a different personality than I was. Kind of laid back California, and those PA guys, they were great guys. But his name was Bob Pappas. He's the one that started that. He was a teammate of mine, and middle guard. But yeah, it stuck. When I was in Chicago, I took some pictures holding in my Bears uniform, holding Nabisco cookies, Fig Newton cookies, and and we were taking pictures of me eating a Fig Newton, and we wrote a letter to Nabisco and we said, "Hey, there really is a Fig Newton in the NFL." I was trying to get a little, offensive linemen were not doing commercials back then. Okay, so it was a reach anyway. But hell, we never even heard back from him, man. They probably just said, but it was fun, and people. A lot of my friends call me that, and it's cool.
Well, my question, Mr. Newton, is I had a question about coming up as an offensive lineman, coming into the NFL, your early playing days. Was there an offensive lineman that you modeled your play after that you wanted to be like? That you had watched as a child or as a young man?
Yeah, well, like I said, Ron Yeary was an idol of mine, and he was a two-time All-American at USC. And then Ron was the first offensive lineman ever to be drafted number one in the NFL draft. He was the first one. He's the one that started that trend, and that was in 1968. But they knew he was good. But and since then there's been hundreds, or no, I don't know about hundreds, but there's been many offensive linemen. But that's another good. Bob Brown, who's a perennial All-Pro. He was from Nebraska, University of Nebraska, and he was a lot bigger than I was. But I remember Bob Devaney when he came out and recruited me to come to Nebraska. I don't know how Coach Devaney and Coach Osmond got around in California. There was no GPS then. and all the freeways and the highways. I don't know. I don't know how people got around without GPS, but he came out and we were talking, and he goes, Bob, we got an offensive lineman there at Nebraska he's playing pro ball now. His name's Bob Brown. And I remember reading an article about Bob Brown 2 years before that, when he was with the Philadelphia Eagles, and how good he was. He was a great young offensive tackle and huge. Bob Brown was one of the big offensive linemen that started that trend. And he said, Bob, this guy lifted weights in his dorm room at night, just kept working. He could push a 7-man sled by himself. Now, have you guys seen those? You've seen those 7-mans. It's hard to push them with 7 guys. It's hard to push it if you got 7 guys pushing it, And for him to be able to do that, it's phenomenal strength. So, he set a big trend there in Nebraska to follow as far as offensive line play. And Jimmy Cadill, who was the starting right guard at Chicago when I got there, he was an 11, 12-year veteran, and I watched him a lot. I had Jim Ringo. You remember Jim Ringo?
It's a good one. Yep.
Yeah, he was our line coach my freshman year, or my rookie year, and he came to me midway through. They drafted me as a tackle, and I was playing left tackle, backing up a veteran that my rookie year. And Jim says, Newton, we're going to move you to guard. He goes, I think you're more fitted to play guard. And man, it was music to my ears. Because at Nebraska, when we had plays where I got to pull, I loved it. And in that era of the NFL in '71, they were still running the Green Bay sweep, both guards pull in, And so I loved to run in the open field. And he goes, and so they moved me mid-season. They moved me to right guard, and then I started at right guard the next year in '72. So, but Jimmy Cadill was a great model of hard work, and just takes time. That's offensive linemen, when they get experience, they're very valuable because it's so unique. It's a unique position, Defense, you can, with a lot of intensity and everything, you can get to the ball. But offense, you got to have the intensity. Plus, you got to have a lot of technique behind it, which is a lot of hard work of repetition.
So in 1976, the NFL expands. They had the Seattle Seahawks. We know that made Leroy happy there. So I just wanted to know, how did the city react to having a team, and what was your experience like there, being part of an expansion team?
Thanks, Brian. The city, I think that was one of the smartest NFL decisions that they made up to that point, is to have an NFL team in Seattle. They were hungry for professional football. Then they got that 12-man. What do you call it? That nickname, the 12-man, for their fans. That 12-man started the first year. I think every one of our games were sold out, and if we got a first down, we got a standing ovation that first year. I mean, they were so excited for football, and And, you know, we only won 3 games that first year, but we showed sparks of that we could be good. We had Steve Largent, who was a rookie. We picked him up from the Houston Oilers. Bum Phillips said it was the worst personnel decision he'd ever made in his life, is letting Steve Largent go. And he was just a super, super player, super teammate, tough. But we had Mike Curtis, who was our defensive captain. They got Mike, and Mike was still resentful and angry that the Colts let him go in the expansion draft. I mean, he goes, hey, he said, I can't wait till we play. I got to know Mike a little bit. And he goes, I can't wait till we play the Colts, man, because I'm gonna be all over the field, man. You know, because he played their, you know, Super Bowls and everything. But he was an intense player, just an ideal linebacker with intensity. But we showed, I thought we showed, we won, like I said, we won 3 games, and we showed some spark that, you know, we had pretty fiery offense. We had a couple of good, our running back, Sherman Smith, was a good running back. Jimmy Zorn, our quarterback, was real solid as a left-hander. We ran a draw plays. It was called 66, 67 sprint draw, where, you know, the flow of the play would go to the right, and Jimmy would kind of take 2 or 3 steps and then hand it to the running back, and then the running back, so everybody's going this way, and the running back would cut it back. I think we averaged about 6 yards a down on that play. So we had Jerry Rome was our offensive coordinator, which he knew Steve. He coached Steve Largent at Tulsa, and he's the one that recommended that we draft Steve, or that we make plans to get Steve if he's on waivers. So it was a long year. I mean, but, and again, I'm thinking, God, here, you know, this is it. This is my NFL career. I'm going to be on it now. You know, I've been with the Bears 5 years and no winning season. Go to 76, no winning season. Then in 77, I got hurt in training camp. Hurt my shoulder pretty significantly, and I missed the three or four games, and then played towards the end. But I think we won 5 games. And then in 78, we put it all together, and we ended up being 9-7, and we missed the playoffs by 1 game. We would have made probably the playoffs in today's, the way they have it now, the system, you know. But we beat the Raiders twice that year. It was a pretty good. It was a good run for us. And of course, Steve, I think that was the first year Steve was chosen for the Pro Bowl. Steve Largent, and All Pro. And so 79, we came back 9-7, and then 80 and 81 was pretty up and down. And then I was let go at the end of the 82 training camp, and a lot of that had to do. If you guys did some research, I had a severe drinking problem and other drugs problems too. So it just at the end there just overwhelmed me. And I just, you know, you're playing up there. I was 33 years old. I'm going against 23, 25, 27-year-old people. And I just, you know, my performance just deteriorated. So they let me go. But that's when I went to the, anyway, I don't want to get too far ahead.
But yeah, we'll get there. Go ahead, Brian.
But well, Bob, you know, people forget, and maybe many young fans don't even know, that the Seahawks were in the AFC West in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and had some fun rivalries with the Chargers, Chiefs, and Raiders and Broncos. So what do you remember about those AFC West battles, and which team sort of stood out as like the biggest rival for your Seahawks?
Good question. Well, I think we couldn't beat the Chargers. We didn't beat the Chargers until '81, and we played them every year, and we finally beat them. We beat them pretty good in 1981, but they were tough, man. They were a playoff team every year, and the Raiders. The Raiders won the Super Bowl in 1981, I think, or from the '81 season. But
Yeah.
and Denver was tough year in and year out, and so was Kansas City. So it was a very competitive conference division, and I can't even remember the year they moved us. I was gone, I think, by then, but it was a great competitive conference because we lost some real close games in that era too to some of those teams, like by 3 points, missing a field goal with the last play. But we had some real tough losses towards the end just on some of those games. But there were some great players in that conference over the years. You had Dan Fouts at San Diego, and he was a great quarterback. Kenny Stabler was at Oakland. I can't remember who Kansas City had at the time. I think they had a couple of different quarterbacks, but it's tough conference.
All right. My question, Mr. Newton, is during your 11 years playing in the NFL, I'm sure you faced some very, like you mentioned, younger, faster defensive players. Which of those defensive players come to mind when you think were the hardest to game plan for or to face off against and play against?
Well, the first one I'd have to mention is Merlin Olsen. Merlin Olsen, when I was a senior at John Glenn High School, Merlin Olsen was already an All-Pro with the Los Angeles Rams, okay? And then when we played the Los Angeles Rams in Soldiers Field when I was Chicago in '72, they named me offensive captain for the game. And so we go out there before the game, and Merlin's captain for their defense. I think Roman Gabriel was out there, and I can't remember I think it was Bobby Douglas, our quarterback. But I remember I go, what the hell am I doing now? We're right in the middle of Soldiers Field. It's packed. Game's getting ready to start. And I got Merlin Olsen like this far from me, across from my, who was he was a raging idol in high school, and it was a hell. He's one of the smart. Not only was he big and strong and quick, but he's very smart, very intellectual player. I could have swore he was in our huddle, man. He just seemed to know our plays, and so you could tell that he really studied. He studied hard, but he was a massive. He was real quick on his feet, and he's about 280, and just very smart. And he went hard every play. And I went up to him after the game. I said, "Thank you very much for the lesson today, Mr. Olsen. You did a good job." But he beat me. He beat me a couple times, caused some havoc in the backfield. It's always embarrassing. I played him a couple more times. I did a little better, but he was definitely a solidified All-Pro and a great guy. I met him later after football. Curly Culp was another great Hall of Fame defensive lineman. He was very, very wasn't a real tall guy, but he was huge, man. I mean, I guess he was a national champion wrestler too when he was at Arizona State. So he knew how to use his hands real well and all that. So he was hard that whole game. I'll tell you another guy I don't think he got enough credit for. It was a guy named Louis Kelcher who played defensive tackle for the Chargers. And Louis was about 6'5", 280, 285, and he was quick, smart, tough, and he was challenging at times. But I had, I had great line coaches. I had Sam Bogosian my rookie year, and Sam helped coach when he left us He went to the Raiders. He coached the offensive line for the Raiders for the 2 years they won the Super Bowl. And then we had Howard Mudd, who was a former All-Pro in the 60s, and he became our line coach, and he helped me out a lot. He helped me break a lot of bad habits that I had developed over the years, especially in my footwork, in using my hands. He was a technician, but he was a very smart football player, and he was great to have there for the remaining of my career. He helped extend my career. There's no doubt about it. And so, you know, you got to scheme these guys that are really, really good. You got to scheme them. You know, you got to come. You can't just say, well, I mean, you hope you can, but sometimes you got to find a way to free somebody up to help you a little bit now and then, you know. And so those coaches in the NFL, they're pretty smart. So they don't want just one guy beating you.
Right.
Thank you.
Matuzak. Oh, I forgot. Matuzak. He was. Did you guys ever get to stand next to him? No.
No.
He was huge, man. I'm telling you, he was huge, and he would wear those Raiders they taped up their forearms. I could have swore they were casts, you know. And one of his favorite moves was as soon as the ball was, you know, his arm was about 10 feet long, and he had this freaking cast at the end of it. And when the ball was high, that's the first thing he did is swing that arm right into your head, man.
Wow.
Oh, he was a big, strong guy. When he really wanted to come, he was phenomenal. Of course, Joe Green. I played against Joe 3 or 4 times. Phenomenal player. You know, he's deserved all the honors he's received, and great leader for the Steelers. So, yeah, it got pretty exciting in the middle there at times. Never a boring moment. Let's put it that way.
Oh, I can imagine. It sounds physical.
You bet. You bet.
So in 1983, you briefly, as I mentioned during the intro, you're in the USFL with Boston and Chicago. I just kind of want to get like your thoughts on the league. I mean, did you feel it was talent-wise as good as the NFL? I know they were starting to take a lot of players in the draft that, you know, we all wanted to see in the NFL, but they ended up going to the USFL because of the money. So I just want to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you. I had a lot of respect for the USFL, and I really, at that time, they had kind of like a farm system. So like the Boston Breakers, if you went to Nebraska then and you wanted to play in the USFL, you were the Boston Breakers like territory. So you had to sign with them. So they kind of split the country up that way for the teams. It was kind of a unique system. So when I went to Boston in that winter '83, they had a lot of former Nebraska players there that I knew, and that was neat. I felt, you know, kind of at home a little bit. But we had a great coach, Dick Corey, who coached in the NFL for a long time. Dick also coached out here at Mater Dei High School and helped put them on the map initially, which Mater Dei is a phenomenal high school program. But I got there, but, you know, guys, my drinking problem had escalated. Every year my drinking problem got worse. And, you know, I was getting drunk every night and then going out there and trying to practice in the heat in Florida. We were in Florida at our training camp at Central Florida, I believe was the campus. And, you know, I just deteriorated, you know. I even came to a team meeting intoxicated. And Coach Corey's up there giving a talk, you know. And I started yelling during the meeting, "You guys aren't paying me enough, man. I need to make some more money." I mean, it was so I don't know how, I don't even know what happened that whole night. I can't really remember a lot of it, but I remember getting a knock at the door at the hotel that early morning and said, Coach Corey wants to see you, Bob. And he said, bring your playbook. So that was when they say bring your playbook, you're done. Okay. So I got to his office and he told me, he says, Bob, if you don't get some help, and I come from significant family background of alcoholism. He said, if you don't get some help, man, you're gonna end up in bad shape, like homeless or Skid Row and all that. And it kind of went in one ear and out the other. And they brought me in there to be a leader on the offensive line. I was thinking, yeah, they're cutting me. My ego was out of whack, and they cut me. And I wrote a letter to the team saying I had to retire because I had a bad knee, which was I didn't have a real good knee, but that's not the reason. It was because of my drinking. Then about 2 weeks later, I get a call from George Allen, the Chicago Blitz, and they said, we'd like for you to come, because they didn't put it in the papers that I was cut because of my drinking. So George just thought, maybe my knee will be okay now that I've given it some rest. And I said, well, God, yeah, I'd love to play for the Chicago Blitz and George Allen and stuff like that. Yeah. And so they first of all, I went to Washington Federals, and I really didn't get back to George Allen, but while I'm there, they get a call. I get a call from the Blitz, and they talked me into coming to Chicago, even though I was at the Federals, the Washington Federals. They wanted to give me a tryout too. So I left that night for Chicago. The coach at Washington was angry that this George Allen, look what he's doing here. He's pulling players out of our training camps, and I thought we weren't going to do that in the USFL and stuff like that. And so went to the Blitz. I was there about 3 weeks. Just terrible. Coach Allen called me in after the third game, and he set me down. He goes, Bob, that was one of the worst offensive line performances I've ever seen. Talking about my performance, because I got to let you go. So that's the way I left the league, and that was in probably February of '83, and I finally got into rehab in July of '83, and I got treatment work for me, and then I've ended up working in the field for about 36 years, helping others, so.
Well, yeah, Bob, can you tell us a little bit more about your work as a counselor, helping people with chemical addiction?
Yeah, it's, when I was in treatment, I had all these myths, what someone that had a drinking problem looked like. And a lot of them were winos on Skid Row, and it was a myth. And I was ignorant about addiction, and they started educating me in treatment, and they, that it's progressive. There's signs and symptoms of it, early signs, middle signs, late stage signs. And by that time, and then when they did the assessment on me, they said, you're a late stage alcoholic addict. Had a problem with pot, started smoking pot pretty early on as an adolescent. And then I got introduced to cocaine in 1974 in Chicago. And it was introduced to me, I'll never forget it. It was introduced to me as a recreational drug. And it's a kind of a social drug. I go, well, hell, I love recreation and I like social too. Let me have some. So, 6-7 years later, I'm buying it on a weekly basis. I'm using it every day. I became addicted to it. And so I lacked a lot of knowledge about addiction. I got educated, went to school to be a counselor, learned a lot more there. I just developed a lot of passion in that treatment center to help others, because I felt that there was just a lot of ignorance in our society about it. And I wanted to help educate and and show that there's another way you can live.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank NFL guard Bob Newton for joining us today. Thank you for sharing your experiences. We really appreciate you being on.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Those were all really good questions.
I'll remind everybody, hit that like and subscribe button. We'll see you all next time. Have a great night.